Bayang magiliw, pere kang silangganan, alab ng puso, sa dibdib mo'y buhay. Oh no, we've got to concentrate on our project first. Let's get started, Shiva.
Hi, I am Siva, a member of Group 22. Today we are going to present a case study involving breach of director's duties under the Corporations Act 2001. Parties involved in the cases: Australian Securities and Investment Company ASIC, which is the plaintiff, and Fortescue Metal Group FMG, first defendant, and its director Mr. Forrest, who is second defendant. FMG is a publicly listed company in Australian Securities Exchange involved mainly in mining and export of iron ore. Now, case introduction. In 2004, the company and its directors were negotiating with three Chinese construction companies to build infrastructure involving iron ore. Later in 2004, FMG executed three similar framework agreements with the Chinese contractors concerning construction of railway, port and mine. In November 2004, on behalf of FMG, Mr. Forrest announced the framework agreement via media conference, a television interview, and other presentations. Following the announcement, FMG's share price increased remarkably from 59 cents per share to $1.93 per share. In March 2005, an article was published by Australian Finance Review newspaper focusing on a number of negative assertions about the project. It claimed that the framework agreement lacked a genuine intention and did not impose any legally binding obligations upon the Chinese contractors. These publications gathered a large media attention and commentary and also resulted in sharp decrease in share price of FMG. A year later, ASIC commenced proceeding against FMG and Mr. Forrest alleging contravention.
Hello, I'm Akriti. I'm going to discuss about how in this case the duty of due care and diligence has been breached. Australian Securities and Investments Commission ASIC appealed because the case raised important issues concerning a listed entity's obligations to disclose information under the continuous disclosure provisions of the Australian Stock Exchange ASX, listing rules and the Corporations Act 2001. The operation of misleading and deceptive conduct provisions of the Act, particularly statements concerning the contents, effect of enforceability of commercial agreements. The role and duties of directors and officers in making statements to the ASX and the investing public, particularly those concerning the contents, effect or enforceability of commercial agreements. ASIC allegations. ASIC claimed the public announcements by FMGL overstated the substance and effect of the agreements with the Chinese companies as they did not contain agreed terms as to price, scope or scheduling. This resulted in the markets and investors being misled as to the true status of the framework agreements. ASIC also claimed the FMGL failed to act in accordance with the continuous disclosure obligations under the Act by failing to accurately disclose the contents of the agreements and by failing to amend the misleading information provided in the announcements. ASIC alleged that Mr. Forrest knew the disparity between what was represented to the public and what was actually contained in the framework agreements, and that this contributed to the imposition of pecuniary penalty of FMGL. ASIC asserted that Mr. Forrest was knowingly involved in FMGL's alleged contraventions and breached his duty of care and diligence as a director of the company by failing to ensure that FMGL complied with the continuous disclosure.
Hi, my name is Deepa. To move forward with the presentation, I would be talking about whether the relevant conduct was misleading or deceptive. ASIC made following submissions regarding the misleading statements made by FMGL, with which the court ultimately agreed. A statement of terms of each of the framework agreements or of their legal effect was likely to influence investors in deciding whether to acquire or dispose of shares in FMGL. Hence, the court focused on what reasonable members of the investing public would have ordinarily understood from the various announcements made by FMGL in deciding whether the relevant conduct of FMGL was misleading or deceptive, or likely to mislead or deceive. The court then held that the various statements made by FMGL would have been perceived as statements of opinion. The court was of the view that the statements suggested without doubt that the Chinese companies had assumed legally enforceable obligations to build the infrastructures. Further, moving forward to the topic Mr. Forrest's duties and as a director, the court held that Mr. Forrest did not take all reasonable steps to ensure compliance with FMGL's disclosure obligations and therefore breached his duty of care and diligence in his position as a director of the company. The court also found that Mr. Forrest was knowingly involved in the relevant events giving rise to FMGL's announcements to the public which were or were likely to be misleading or deceptive. The court held that Mr. Forrest was aware of the terms of the framework agreements and it could reasonably be inferred that he knew of the discrepancy between those terms and FMGL's representations about them. In defense, Mr. Forrest, it was argued that he took all steps that were reasonable in the circumstances to ensure that FMGL complied with its obligations, and after doing so, he believed on reasonable grounds that FMGL was so complying. Further, the court found that the defense was not available to Mr. Forrest. Despite seeking legal advice after the misleading statements were disclosed to the public, there was nothing to suggest that he took steps to ensure that the framework agreements were in law binding agreements before their content was made public by FMGL. Also, ASIC was able to show that Mr. Forrest's own communication were inconsistent with a belief on his part that FMGL had made a binding agreement for the construction of the infrastructure of the project.
Hi, my name is Nishan and I'm going to discuss and analyze the court decisions on our topic. The initial case was heard before a trial judge in federal court who dismissed ASIC's allegations and acquitted FMG, saying framework agreement had honest purpose which was based on the statement of opinions and had not concealed any facts relating to the framework agreement, therefore denying the alleged violation of section 6742. And also, in accordance to the previous two holdings, the court acquitted Mr. Forrest of any accessorial liability as the director of the company. ASIC repealed the case before full federal court, arguing that the initial framework declarations wasn't sufficiently binding and lacked information on substantial subject matter, price and timeline for the project. Full federal court supported ASIC's allegations this time and held that the declarations were not binding but just motivated to finalize the negotiation as opposed to having the work done. Additionally, referring to the general law, court stated that an innocent party is not necessarily expected to perceive the term of an agreement as a statement of opinion, and held FMG responsible for the deceptive and misleading conduct. Court also held Mr. Forrest guilty of continuous disclosure requirements under accessorial liability rule relating to 6742A and in failure to correct the statements. This complex case was again repealed in High Court by FMG and Mr. Forrest, where the court overturned the previous decision made by Federal Court. The High Court stated that framework declarations had accurately described the content of the project and the declarations had genuine binding intentions.
The decisions were based on the fact that these statements in the framework agreements were not deceptive but had honest intentions. The court argued that the investors had enough grounds to understand the scope of the project, and the court also falsified ASIC's allegations on Mr. Forrest of trying to alter the very terms of the agreement and defended that it was a valid commercial attempt of getting a better bargain. To conclude, this was a complex case where the outcomes juggled in between the parties at different hearings on different courts. It is noteworthy that the final decision made by the High Court was in favor of the defendants. In doing so, the decision pointed out to ASIC the need for greater transparency and also impugned its very litigation motive and strategy.
Thank you. Hiniran, duyan ka na magiting sa manlulupig, di ka pa sisil sa dagat at bundok, sa simoya, sa langgat mong bugaw, may dilag ang tula at awit sa paglayang minamahal. Ang kislap ng watawat mo'y tagumpa na nagninigning, ang bituin na tara niya kailan pa may di magbidilim. Lupa ng aranang mahardi pagsinta, buhay aming sa piling mo. Aming ligaya na pagmanapi ang matamang dahil sa'yo.